Hello, welcome to another video by yours truly. When you start to study law, one of the first things that you are asked to explore is your own legal system. This video introduces you to some of the primary sources of our law, but does not consider our indigenous law, called Brehon law, or other sources like custom and tradition. I urge you to research those things on your own, as they are fascinating subjects in themselves, but unfortunately too broad for this introductory video. You really must get to know your own history, lads. I am truly sorry for the appallingly bad pronunciation of Irish words, but my avatar's Irish is even worse than mine. So let's get off this horse's arse and begin the show. The four primary sources we will be looking at are the Constitution of Ireland, the Legislature of Ireland, known as the Oireachtas, the courts, and finally, EU law. The Irish Constitution was ratified by the Irish people in 1937. It is the fundamental law of the state. It is the second constitution of the Irish state since independence, replacing the 1922 Constitution of the Irish Free State. It came into force on the 29th of December 1937 following a statewide plebiscite held on the 1st of July 1937. Every part of the Constitution is set out in both the Irish and English languages. Article 8 states that the Irish language is the first official language and that the English language is recognised as a second official language. The Constitution of Ireland is the basic law of the state. It is the canopy under which justice is administered and legal rights are enforced in courts established by law. By its express provisions, it recognizes and guarantees protection of the fundamental rights of persons. Things like dignity and privacy, which are like swear words to the average modern regime. The Constitution is superior to any other Irish law. Draw a line under that point, it is important. Containing 50 articles and 15 transitory articles, the Constitution establishes the institutions of the state and lays down the rules governing the interaction between the organs of state and between the state and the individual. Think of the referee in the MMA cage trying to keep the fight fair and clean, especially when one of the fighters is you-know-who. Citizens can use the Constitution to challenge the constitutionality of laws passed by the Oireachtas and to seek the help of the courts if they think that their constitutional rights have been violated in some way. Under the terms of Article 6 of the Constitution, sovereignty is vested in the Irish people, although the state is sovereign in terms of its standing in matters of international law. This means that in theory the people should be driving national policy and their elected representatives, when they get out of the bar in the Dáil, should simply be conduits. Look it up. Does it work like that in practice? You decide. The state of Ireland is answerable before the courts for wrongs committed against citizens for breach of their constitutional or legal rights. The courts should be like your huge school friend who whacks the playground bully. The Constitution creates a tripartite separation of powers: the legislature, the Oireachtas, the executive, the Taoiseach and the cabinet of ministers, who head the various government departments, and the judiciary are the courts. The legislature creates the law. The executive implements or enforces the law. The judiciary interprets the law. This means that each of these three organs of state protects its own turf by not allowing one of the other two organs of state to do what only it is allowed to do. Like dude, stay in your corner. The Constitution may only be altered following a referendum, as stated in Article 46. What usually happens is that the public are given the wording of the proposed amendment on the ballot sheet, and each voter simply says yes or no. A majority of yes votes will amend the Constitution, but a majority no vote will leave it unchanged. What has happened in the past, no names mentioned, but look it up, is that if the government of the day did not like the result, they just called another referendum. I don't think that is what the Constitution writers intended, do you? Legislation. Your elected representatives at work. Legislation is law that is passed by the Oireachtas or by the authority of the Oireachtas. This legislation must be compatible with the Constitution. If legislation is found to be incompatible with the Constitution, the courts can throw it out and the Oireachtas will have to try again. It's like the court is saying, lads, you need to do better. Every citizen has the right to challenge the constitutionality of any legislation by bringing it to court. If only the average citizen could afford to go to court, that would be grand. Primary legislation is the most powerful form of legislation as it is passed by the Oireachtas and therefore should represent the voice of the people. These acts are national. They apply to everybody in the country and sometimes to Irish citizens abroad. Sometimes a member of the Oireachtas, they are called TD rather than MP, will propose a law on their own. These are known as private acts. This does not happen very often. I was thinking of a private act to nationalise Tayto. Crisps for all. What do you think? The Principal Act, i.e. the original formulation of that act, creates new law. The Amendment Act, subsequent changes to that act, rationalises, which means shorter and sweeter, amends, which means it changes, the Principal Act, or sometimes it consolidates existing acts, which simply means it collects those acts together into one instrument without necessarily changing them. Because it would be impossible to make laws to cover every situation happening in the country, the Oireachtas can authorise people or organisations to make laws on its behalf. This is known as secondary legislation, where the Oireachtas delegates its power to somebody or something to make laws. If the person or thing goes further than they were authorised to do, this is known as ultra vires, outside the law, and can be struck down by the courts in a process known as judicial review. Oh, by the way, Irish judges don't use hammers. That's only on American TV, and they are called gavels. Examples of secondary or delegated legislation include orders, for example, adding or removing a substance from a schedule in the Misuse of Drugs Act. You're right, vape shops should not be selling THC. Rules, for example, rules of court procedure. Have a look on the Courts Service of Ireland site. Statutory instruments to give effect to an act, for example, the smoking ban or the plastic bag levy. Bylaws created by a council, for example, litter or rubbish collection and disposal, which your man with the dump truck just ignores. Regulations, for example, asbestos regulations in terms of the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Act. Case law and precedent. Ireland is a common law system, which means it recognises case law or judge-made law as being capable of setting legal precedent. Legal precedent is created when 1. The Irish law is silent on the matter. The court will look at the laws of other countries to see how they have dealt with a similar issue. Because of the historical ties between the two legal systems, the courts will often look to English law first for guidance, but can also look at other common law legal systems and, of course, European law. 2. Where the situation or principle before the court is something that an Irish court has never encountered, the court will usually proceed in the same way as it deals with issues where the law is silent. 3. Where legislation is unclear or ambiguous and needs to be interpreted by the court. This process is called statutory interpretation. 4. Where there are conflicting decisions of a lower court, then a superior court can decide the issue one way or the other, and that will become the law of the land unless it is changed by an even higher court, or the law is changed by the Oireachtas. Legal precedent is either binding when another, lower, Irish court must follow the principle laid out by a superior Irish court. Persuasive, when another court can choose to follow the principle laid out by the earlier court, that could be a lower or equivalent Irish court, or any foreign court, but is not compelled to do so. The principle contained in a legal precedent is known as the ratio decidendi, which in English means the reason for deciding, and it is this that must be followed. Whereas the other findings or pronouncements or interpretations which were not decisive of the decision and therefore do not have to be followed are known as the obiter dicta, which in English means the leftover words, or other things said. The Republic of Ireland is a member state of the European Union, and if anybody tells you that we should leave the EU, you tell them they are brain damaged. Ireland has benefited hugely from being in the EU. Ask the UK, they will tell you. The Irish people elect representatives to promote Irish interests in the European Parliament. They are known as MEPs, members of the European Parliament. What do they do? That question has been asked a million times. The European Parliament creates laws for the whole of the European Union, the EU. This law is known as European law or simply EU law. The Republic of Ireland has accepted that in certain areas of law, for example, employment law, health and safety law, the EU law is superior to our constitution and other legislation. EU law covering these areas cannot be declared unconstitutional by an Irish court. Irish courts are obliged to follow and implement EU law where applicable. This has had a massive, and mostly positive, impact on Irish law. Our employment law, for example, has taken great strides in increasing employee protection, although we still have a way to go. The primary legislation of the EU is the current treaty, which is really the constitutional law of the EU. The secondary legislation of the EU derives from the treaty. These are directives and regulations. The Court of Justice of the European Union, the CJEU, is the judicial branch of the European Union, EU. Seated in Luxembourg, the CJEU consists of two separate courts, the Court of Justice and the General Court. The CJEU is the chief judicial authority of the EU and oversees the uniform application and interpretation of European Union law in cooperation with the national judiciary of the EU member states. The CJEU also resolves legal disputes between national governments and EU institutions and may take action against EU institutions on behalf of individuals, companies, or organizations whose rights have been infringed. Certain decisions of the EU Commission also have legal effect, but these decisions are not applicable to everyone in the EU. They have legal effect only for parties to whom they are addressed. EU regulations have direct effect on Irish law. This means they become part of our law when they are passed. For example, there are EU regulations that govern Irish law in the following areas: energy, popular measures like smokeless coal. Consumer protection, will you please stop putting sugar in our food? Food, ditto. Education, please be nice to our teachers and pay them more, or they will all go to Australia. Health and safety law, protection for when we act the maggot. EU directives, on the other hand, do not become Irish law directly and immediately. The member states are given a certain time, often 2 years, to introduce the objectives and principles of the directive into their national law. This allows each member state a degree of flexibility to adapt the directive to conform with their national law whilst achieving the stated objectives. This process of integrating the EU objectives into the Irish law is known as transposition. Despite what the politicians might tell you, transposition does not mean to long finger it. Examples of areas where directives have shaped Irish law are anti-discrimination, consumer protection, energy efficiency, environment, food privacy, and data protection. And here is a practical exercise to do with your classmates. Debate the following topic and provide factual examples. Has any recent Irish government actually implemented these? The EU has an excellent website called europa.eu. Jesus, that was a journey. Say it with me. I can see clearly now, the rain is gone. Take care, work hard, and get out there and rock and roll.